Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Reprogram podcast. I'm your host, Dr. George Murphy. Our guest today is Dr. Benjamin Wolozin, a professor in the Department of Anatomy and Neurobiology at Boston University Chobanian and Avedisian School of Medicine. Dr. Wolozin is one of the foremost experts in the field of neurodegenerative disease, and his lab focuses on the molecular and cellular underpinnings of several of these diseases, including Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, and ALS. One of the coolest things about him and his laboratory is on their website. It actually explicitly states that their goal is to do cool science and generate great ideas. I hope you enjoy today's discussion. And remember, knowledge is power. Ben, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Always a pleasure to talk to you, George.
So my first question, which I'd like to start with, is everyone's origin story. So if you would you regale us with your origin story and your trajectory, how you became interested in science, and then following on from that, how you became interested in neuroscience and neurodegeneration?
So I was just always one of those nerdy kids, when I was like 8, I would read the books of Magellan and Cook, discovering the world. And just would imagine I was them. And for me, it's always been about discovery, and to give a sense of culturally, I'm Jewish, but I think I was an atheist from the time I was a zygote.
Okay.
Because when I had my bar mitzvah, I gave a talk on the Ten Commandments on why they made sense from a secular standpoint. And it didn't even occur to me that I was saying anything radical. It didn't occur to me until my teacher got up in front of everyone and told everyone that I was the most difficult student he'd ever had, and that I asked him so many difficult questions, which I wasn't even aware of. And then, like, when I didn't have anything to do in high school, I would go to the library. That's a big building that has something that no one uses.
Yes.
It's called books. And I would actually read Science and Nature and dream about like writing articles in those, and in high school I was interested in the brain and astrophysics. It's like, this is your science nerdy story. I would like to say that there was something more like interesting and dynamic about me, but no, I was just like, that's why my brain worked from when I was a zygote.
And then your subsequent training, and then how you specified or went through your own sort of developmental trajectory as far as what you became as a scientist and what you study now. How did you sort of gain those interests?
So I was in college and I was doing research in chemistry. And I thought to myself, this is not great because you can't talk about chemistry socially. It's like, wasn't the way to go, because I just couldn't see like being a party and talking about chemistry. It just didn't work for me. Let's see. I went to neuroscience, and there as a technician, ultimately I decided to do an PhD, and then I went to graduate school, planning on doing research in opiates. But the first person I did research with in opiates, it just didn't resonate for me. And so people said, choose someone by what you really enjoy.
Great advice.
Like who someone you like. And so I went and talked to this guy, Peter Davies, and he went and he pulled a couple of beers out of the cold room, and gave one to me, and we drank beer and talked science the whole afternoon. And I thought to myself, his research was in Alzheimer's, and I thought to myself, I could do that, And so that started me out, and I just stayed with the field. It's just been part of my life for over 40 years.
40 years, Ben, and thankfully you're still doing it. So you brought up the concept of Alzheimer's disease. As a world expert on neurodegeneration, I think one of the interesting things, and maybe for our listeners as well, is the confusion as to what is neurodegeneration or what is Alzheimer's disease. So there continues to be this ever-evolving definition. People now like to say Alzheimer's disease and related dementia. As an expert, if you were to define Alzheimer's disease or neurodegeneration and how you would classify it as far as the molecular or cellular events, maybe even the functional properties of it, how would you sort of define what neurodegeneration and more specifically Alzheimer's disease is?
So let me start out with the
Please.
basics for the average person listening. First of all, first thing, before you freak out about the fact that you can't remember something, that's not the first sign of Alzheimer's disease. The first sign of Alzheimer's disease is the inability to do complex tasks. So a story I like to tell, to give you a sense, is a mathematician, he probably 50 years ago, came into a clinic at the University of Chicago and said, "Doc, I think I've developed Alzheimer's disease." And the doc said, "Why?" And the mathematician said, "Well, I used to be able to multiply two 7-digit numbers in my head, and now I can only multiply two 5-digit numbers in my head. Can you tell me if I have disease?" At that time, we didn't have brain scans, we didn't have blood scans. What we would do is ask people to count backwards from 100 by 7.
Wow.
And the clinician kind of turned to the mathematicians and said, "I don't think we can, tell you that." And the reality is that people who are really using their brains a lot, they can go a long time before it really appears as a disease. But in this case, with this clinician, 2 years later, he's shown up demented.
Wow.
So complex calculations. So next point, some cognitive loss with aging is normal. You think slower. You might have more associations, but you think slower. It's harder to remember things. That's a normal process of aging that you can expect. I wish it weren't. I wish I had the memory of when I was 25 years old, but that happens. So there's normal cognitive aging. And there are certainly people who are centenarians, like you study, super old, who think really well. But those are a minority. The next step is you kind of go to what's called mild cognitive impairment. You're still functional, but you have difficulty doing complex tasks. You have some difficulties remembering, but you can do your job. Just know something's wrong. And then you go to dementia. Now, in that context, there's a lot of different kinds of dementia. So Alzheimer's disease, that's a particular type of dementia that's strongly associated with these pathological markers, beta amyloid and tau, but also inflammation. But another type of disease that's common is vascular dementia. So, if you had Alzheimer's disease, they can actually do blood tests now. But if you have vascular dementia, you might have an MRI and you might be on blood thinners. I think some have noted, that the current president fills those criteria, but not the criteria of Alzheimer's. And so those are so there's a wide variety, and then there's other flavors of it. And then one of the things that we're really understanding is how much people differ. I look different than you, and we look different than other people. If you look at the pathology in some people, like example, African Americans, classically we say, "Oh, Alzheimer's, beta amyloid is the big sign of Alzheimer's." If you're a pathologist or if you're looking at a scan, turns out that African Americans don't develop as much beta amyloid. So it varies by ethnicity, and that's something that, if we really want to treat the diversity of America, we really need to study more than Caucasians. And that was something, studying what we call ancestry is a super important part of what we do these days.
So many things to unpack there, and you've hit many of my questions, so I'll just ask them sort of in order. So I guess one of the questions, and probably what people are wondering, is if you live long enough, and you kind of alluded to this, does that mean you're automatically going to develop some sort of cognitive decline? You mentioned that there's normal sort of cognitive decline that occurs with aging, but is everyone expected to go through some sort of disease process that could be classified as neurodegeneration? So if you live long enough, will you develop the disease?
So I have a principle called the Edwin principle. Edwin was my wife's uncle.
Okay.
He was a physicist, and like many physicists, he was trained in binary, right?
Sure.
And I was in a car once, riding with him, and he asked me, we were talking, and somehow I got into what turned to be a monologue about healthy eating. And so after my blathering about for about 25 minutes about healthy eating, Edwin looks at me and says one thing, and only one thing. He looks at me and he says, Ben, you're going to die. So we're all going to die, sadly, and we're going to die of something. So really the question becomes, how long will we retain our cognitive functioning as we kind of age? And there are people who are able to maintain cognitive functioning for a long, long time, and then you're going to die. Hopefully, you'll die of something else, because everyone's wish, I think, is to die in their sleep without pain, without knowing it's going to happen. It's not commonly the way it happens. But this is going to anticipate your question. People always ask me this, and I talk to Uber drivers about this. Like, oh, how do we maintain our health? And for all the millions and billions of dollars that have been spent in science, it really comes down to two simple concepts. First concept: heart health is brain health. Anything that you would do to keep your heart healthy, that works for your brain too.
So important.
Exercise, why? We don't quite know, but it definitely works. And for those of you who hate this message and say, I don't like to exercise, I doodle, I like art, the best way is to consider exercise not as your avocation, not as your leisure day. It's part of your work day. So when you work, you're going to exercise. And then when you're on, free time, don't worry about exercising. And the second thing is, you are what you eat. So, eat well. Are those panaceas? Absolutely not. That irritates me. That, for all this money, is that what we have to show for ourselves? I could have told you that 20 years ago.
Yeah. Speaking of all the money we spent on things, one of the questions I've always had that people always ask me about, you talked about the diversity of disease. So it seems as if, particularly for something like Alzheimer's disease, and we talked about how, non-specific and different the disease can be from person to person, which might, sort of be a prelude to my question. Why has it been so challenging in the developmental trajectory of therapies for something like Alzheimer's disease, right? People have heard that the therapeutic efficacy or impact of some of the drugs that have been in pipelines where millions of dollars have been spent with really not much to show for it. Why do you think that's the case?
Oof, there is so much to unpack there. So Alzheimer's is a disease defined by particular pathologies and cognitive decline. And we look at that, and those pathologies were associated with this particular genetics. Beta amyloid genetics were the first things that were found. And so everyone assumed when it was found that that's the magic bullet. And in some people, they are. I remember interviewing a graduate student, age 26, whose family had mutations, and she herself had a mutation in an Alzheimer gene. And she said, yeah, people in my family get demented at 36.
Wow.
And she was going to graduate school. So definitely there's some people where that's the answer. But in the same way that, if you see something going wrong in your garden, kind of hard to figure out why it's going wrong. You see the flowers dying. Was the problem that the petals are falling off? Not exactly. And so as scientists, we have to kind of dig through to integrate all of this stuff. And we've gone through phases. At first, we thought it was beta amyloid. Just clear beta amyloid is important, and it's very clear. It's been shown clinically that if you reduce beta amyloid, you actually can slow the disease. So that's part of it. Is that all of it? No. So then they went to they go at the next phase now, looking at the next big protein called tau, clinically. discovered one of the first reagents for tau when I was a graduate student 45 years ago. If you had told me 45 years ago that in 2025, people would be saying, wow, there's tau therapeutics coming through. We're so excited. That's the leading edge. I would have laughed and probably fainted from laughing. I wouldn't have believed it. But here we are. It goes slowly. Why does it go slowly? There's so many things, it turns out, that you have to do to even get to test these things. And it's possible that some of the things that were tested 20 years ago actually did work, but we didn't know it. So you kind of think as a layperson, oh, just ask someone, can they remember? But it turns out there's a lot of variability in whether you can remember. We look different. I slept poorly last night. Maybe you slept well, what you ate, all these things. And that gives rise to variability in testing. And that means that a lot of times, a lot of these tests, you can see something's happening. It's just not statistically significant because of the variability. In the intervening time from the discovery, one thing we have made immense advances in is the ability to use biomarkers to detect it, which reduces the variability and makes so that we can really precisely see what's going on. I know you want to ask another question.
Yeah, so because that really kind of is a Venn diagram of some of my other questions. So you had mentioned, phospho-tau or tau as a biomarker. So I think people are concerned as they age, and is it forgetfulness? Is there a way to diagnose me if I have some form of neurodegeneration or Alzheimer's disease? So are you a believer? I think you might be, based on what you just said, the complexity of the disease, the diversity of sort of the phenotypic expression of that disease in many different people, the biomarkers like tau and these other things, are those things that you feel are going to have a big impact? Are these things that are readily available in the clinic now? And do you see them being impactful in sort of the course of disease etiology and maybe even with diagnoses?
So it's a bunch of things to unpack, but I want to start off with something that's really simple for
Please.
people to know. Like, genetics sounds really complicated, George, and even to us,
Yes.
right? But for the average person, if you want to know your genetics, if you want to know your risk, look at your parents, look at your grandparents, look at your aunts and uncles. That's your genetics. That's where you can exactly tell what's likely to happen. So, that's a beginning. So if your parents lived to 100 and were cognitively intact and everyone around you is that way, and you're noticing you're having poor memory, it's much more likely you're not getting enough sleep, than it is you have something else going on. So be realistic. Memory, that's connected strongly with sleep. But once you worry that you might have a problem, the question is what's out there. And it turns out these tests have been getting great. And so the phospho-tau, one of these markers of this phosphorylated tau protein, can actually tell 10 years before you would get dementia that you will get dementia. That you will have disease if that's what you're at risk for. Does that matter now? Well, a little bit because of the A-beta therapies, and increasingly it's going to matter as we develop approaches to do it. If you had asked me that 5 years ago, I would have said, well, there's no treatment. So, it's not as important. It's important when you can treat it, or if you want your children to know or something. So that's one thing. The second thing is who actually can access these assays.
Exactly.
And there are revolutions there. So for instance, they're developing a test. It's now being tested in the clinic for this phospho-tau marker that works on paper.
On paper?
Yeah, so you could just send it anywhere. That's one point. Second point, this is the digital age, right? They are taking this powerful computer in our pocket and using it to monitor everything, and then simply using machine learning to find out what things actually correlate with kind of disease progression. And so you can use that now remotely from Africa, from rural America, to actually determine that. And one of the cool things is nowadays, if there are they have a lot of DNA and RNA, a lot of biofluids on lots of people. You take all that fancy molecular stuff that's been done, you cross-reference it with this, and then you can find out, oh my God, this little signal on my phone correlates with this gene.
Interesting.
It's very cool what you're beginning to be able to do.
Love that. We are obviously all about accessibility. And so as a fellow molecular biologist, we are huge believers in genes and genetics. But the question I think is on a lot of people's mind, is on my mind as far as our studies are concerned, is what is in our genes, what is genetic as far as drivers of these disease processes, and what's environmental. So as an expert, can you stratify crudely for us, ballpark for us, as far as your development of neurodegenerative disease, how much of that is actually purely genetic, right? Or environmental? So nature versus nurture. Can you stratify that for us? How much do we ourselves have an impact on how we live our lives, and that relating to something like Alzheimer's disease?
So then let me stratify this in two ways. Genes vary in terms of the impact that they have. There's a small number of people that have big impact genes. And so that graduate student, right? Your family gets sick at age 36, big impact. Not going to be so sensitive to whether she's eating, tutti frutti healthy food, but for many of us, what I say is, there are right now, two of us here, and by age 85, classically, one of us will be demented. So anyway, but 85 is a long time. That means it's a very slow-acting thing, which a lot of stuff can impact on. So again, look at your parents. If your parents are developing something later, much more, much easier to impact on it and delay the appearance of disease. If you have someone that has a disease that appears at 45 or 55, much harder to impact on. So most of us have these risk factors that impact later in life. For Alzheimer's, the classic one is as ApoE4.
Sure.
It's going to impact, let's say, between 65 and 75. That's an age where you really can affect how quickly it acts on you. And just to make it very real, this is quite real for me, because when I was 60, my wife's cousin, he's overweight, doesn't like to exercise, and he's always really kind of like, I don't know whether he's angry at me or jealous, whatever. We actually get along great. But for my 60th birthday, he got 23andMe kit to see just how healthy I was. And so I did it, right? And I looked at it, and I had a mutation that put me at risk for Parkinson's disease. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, who the hell gave that to me? And so, I immediately went, my mom died at age 20, so I immediately went to my dad, like, give me your saliva. I'm checking this, right? My dad was super healthy, the dude. He lived to 99 and a half and didn't have it. So my mom's dead. I go to my uncle. I'm like, Dan, give me your saliva. And indeed, it was them. And if I had just looked at my relatives, I would have figured it out, because
Your point.
he was fine. He actually lived till 96. And he worked till 92, but his cousin died of Parkinson's disease at like age 75. So there it was.
Perfect example.
So what did I do? I immediately started doing things. So I love to exercise healthy anyway, but George, like you, I'm a scientist. I immediately looked up and I was like, well, kind of what repurposed drug might be out there helping mice that I could take.
Exactly.
And I started taking a drug that is now in phase 2 clinical trials. I don't know if it'll work for those people who already have disease, but I don't have it yet. So I'm fantasizing, hoping no impact. So that's an example of how knowing your genetics, if you're willing to do it, can help. And you might ask me, what about my kids? What about my grandkids? So I have talked to this with my kids. And I'm like, look, you might be at risk here. You don't have to worry about it till you're 50, but then at 50, you need to start dealing with it.
Yeah. Knowledge is power, right? That's what we always say. Another perfect segue for me that was so beautifully told and such a great example. You and I don't know if it's a renewed interest, but we have an interest in aging. We just wrote a grant together where we coined sort of a phrase, age-related sort of dysfunction or age dis, right? And so this podcast is about aging, longevity, rejuvenation, things of that nature, right? So if you look at dementia, if you look at Alzheimer's disease, neurodegeneration as an aging-related disease, do you have thoughts rather than developing therapeutics about some of these things you discussed, tau or amyloid or some of these frontline, the disease has already manifested itself. What about the concept of targeting aging? So you had noted these diseases develop later on in life. What if you actually, do you feel there's utility in developing drugs to target the aging process itself as a proxy for preventing the development of neurodegeneration? How do you feel about that?
So one of the things that I haven't done yet, and I pay a lot of attention to, is this idea of getting rid of senescent cells.
Sure.
And I want to preface this by one of the things, our bodies balance off, and I'm preaching your choir, our bodies balance off resilience versus cancer. Because the more you increase resilience, the more you make cancer cells resilient. So there's something to be said for the risk of taking things that make you too resilient, because then you might die of cancer.
Sure.
But this idea that, and you and I are learning that as we age, a lot of aging is actually inflammation, and inflammation is stimulated by old cells secreting things that tell that send out warning signals to the immune system, and so you get this big inflammatory response. And I'm sure if you invite someone else on, they can go on for hours about the immune system and aging. But it makes sense to me, and I've noticed this in the literature, that it seems like if you get rid of those those senescent cells, that you reduce the inflammation, you make your immune system quieter, and that, at least in animal models, seems to help people. And I've noticed in the Alzheimer field, there's someone who's great to talk to, Miranda Orr at Washington University in St. Louis, who's taking some of these drugs that kind of fill senescent cells and trying them in people, and with potentially some success. I'm watching it because those drugs have side effects. The problem with almost every drug is that it has side effects. And if you wonder why a drug's so expensive, it's because it's actually relatively easy to develop a drug that can do something. It is super hard to develop a drug that can do something and doesn't hurt someone in the community. And so when you're paying for the drugs, what you're actually paying for is all the failed trials because of something that seemed effective, was effective, but when you gave it to like 100 people, one or two of those people really had a bad time with it.
Yeah. So Ben, one of the things we've discussed as academics is grant writing. You and I just spent a huge amount of time writing sort of a classical R01 NIH funded grants. We just got over the government being closed for one of the longest times in history. I would love to hear your thoughts about governmental, or the NIH. If people don't know, the National Institutes of Health actually fund a lot of our research at the university and academic level. Do you have any thoughts as a scientist who's been in the game, as you've noted, for such a long time, sort of the current state of funding of science and your feelings as far as where that's headed? Talk about a big question.
Yeah. So I want to first start off with the basics, which I think a lot of us forget, which is that we work for the people. We're scientists. If NIH is funding us, NIH is funding us to do something that's going to help people. It's really enjoyable to do our work.
Yes.
We're really lucky that we get to do it. But fundamentally, we're being paid by the government, and our goal is to help people, to help you, the viewer. So that's at its baseline. And so the question is, what is the goal of government? When a new government comes in and says, we need to cut down all this, what are they doing? Well, fundamentally, what they're saying is, we want to put less money into helping develop new therapies, helping make you healthier and happier. And it's a legitimate question. We want to give more money to either to the military, give some of it back to the taxpayer so you have it. There's real arguments to be made there. And so, this is that what's going on at NIH is a philosophic view on where do you put money. You believe knowledge is power. I believe knowledge is power also, but it's really important to me that people be happy and healthy. And what I notice when I look at health indexes, are people happy and healthy? It's actually in places where people invest in helping people. So the happiest places are in the Nordic countries where government takes a lot of money from people and puts a lot of into stuff, but people are generally happy. And so to my perspective, that's good. I am a scientist. I'm operating in this environment. I want to do work that will help people. And so the chaotic way that's happening impacts on so many things. As fast as you feel like, as much as it's doing here. So I also have a biotech company. We have a drug that's going towards clinical trials. Yay, hopefully it'll be good. But the striking thing is how rapidly biotech and pharma responded to what went on and has shrunk. Like on our floor, when after the administration came in, we were the only company in our incubator left. They're the only biology company left on the floor that was functional, and we reduced the size of our staff by half. So there was a huge struggle that continues, and so that the chaotic way that that's happened, the abrupt way that happens, messes up people's lives. So separate from you and me, I've talked to students who are graduating, and they can't get a job with their master's or with their PhD, and they have to go work in sales. Their dreams are broken.
Yeah.
And so it's really impacts on people's lives much more than simply like, can you do research? But what am I going to do? Existential crises for life because of the chaotic way that it's come forward. So there's that. And I understand that that some people listening may say, this is life, but it doesn't have to be this way. I feel we should care about people. We should do things in a thoughtful manner.
For sure. And just to end positively, do you see light at the end of the tunnel? I think we are lucky to be scientists in an era of transformative therapies where really the science has caught up to sort of the hopes and dreams of what it has as far as a potential for curing diseases that have plagued us for decades. Can you expound on the potential of things and maybe directionality that science can give us as sort of that beacon on the hill that can really kind of maybe reduce healthcare costs or improve the lives of people?
Most scientists are enthusiastic about what they do, and so maybe my enthusiasm will work out, maybe it won't. But what I do believe is that there are other people like me out there with other approaches that are as enthusiastic, and we're at an age where we're essentially hacking the body. We're bioengineering the body. And I 100% believe that's going to yield. Now, for aging, okay, first I want to get a little bit of cynical perspective. I too want to live as long as possible, but I watched this movie on Netflix, this series, Life on This Planet,
Mm.
and it like went over life over 25 million year jumps. And what I noticed in that was that there was nothing that lived for 25 million years, let alone a billion years,
Yeah.
which was disappointing to me. It was also disappointing that the most hardy thing seems to be fungi. I don't really identify with fungi, but whatever. Um, so, um, so we when we talk about aging, we're really talking about aging around the edges. Compared to a fruit fly, George, you are very long lived.
Yes.
And you'd like on average, we can as guys, we can live to like on average 88. Women, get more diseases, but are so much more hardy and they live longer, 92 on average, and more septenarians. But it would be nice to live to 105, let's say we get it to 110. Great. 110, 90 or 110 versus 25 million, not quite where I want to be. So I think there's a limit for how much medicine can do it. And if you ever look at those little cells you grow in culture, imagine keeping a cell alive for 200 years. That's challenging.
Definitely challenging. Ben, it's been an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate your time and most of all, your energy. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, listeners.
We hope you enjoyed this discussion, so please follow our podcast and join me on this journey of understanding and self-discovery as we navigate our way into the fields of longevity, aging biology, regenerative medicine, and the emerging field of geroscience.